Hello, bonjour. My name is Stephanie Cadieux, and I'm Canada's Chief Accessibility Officer. And I'm here today in my hometown of Surrey, British Columbia, on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Katzie, Kwantlen, and Semiahmoo First Nations. Thank you so much for joining us for a conversation about the advantages of accessibility, flexibility, and a trust-based approach when it comes to achieving results and creating stronger, more adaptable, more profitable and productive workplaces. I've invited Dr. Matthew Chow, Chief Mental Health Officer for TELUS Health, to talk about this with me today. Dr. Chow is the Chief Mental Health Officer at TELUS Health, Canada's largest digital health company. He trained in child and adolescent psychiatry at UBC and served as president of Doctors of British Columbia during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 and 2021. He's an executive and medical specialist known for purpose-driven leadership across private enterprise, public administration, and organized labor. With 2 decades of experience in healthcare, innovation, and governance, he brings a systems-level perspective that bridges both clinical expertise, technology, and, of course, organizational strategy. His work reimagines how we might interact with technology to create strong, resilient companies, health systems, and communities. And I recently had the opportunity to hear Dr. Chow speak at the Open Door Group's Untapped Awards ceremony, recognizing excellence in accessibility and inclusion. And in his presentation, it resonated with me and aligned with so much of what we talk about when we talk about accessibility, what it really means and why it matters so much. So I'm really pleased that he's agreed to join me today so that we can share this conversation with a much wider audience. At the heart of Dr. Chow's presentation at the Untapped Awards was the idea that accessible and inclusive culture begins with trust, and everything follows from there: psychological safety, better mental health, flexibility, and results. And in my work as Chief Accessibility Officer, I say all the time that changing the culture remains our biggest challenge when it comes to eliminating barriers, to rooting out that deeply held unconscious bias and changing perceptions about disability. Because until we flip that script, all of the possibilities and the policies and regulations in the world won't be enough to create a truly barrier-free Canada. I think it's important that we recognize that when it comes to accessibility, particularly when we're talking about employment, many of the barriers exist because trust does not exist. The barriers are there as guardrails, and we see it reflected in very rigid hiring processes, testing policies, and rules around workplace accommodations. Dr. Chow is leading, I believe, some excellent work around this with TELUS. So let's hear from him. Thank you so much again for joining me today, Matt. So let's start us off, just tell us a little about the work you're doing with TELUS Health and what you're seeing in the results.
Well, first of all, I'm so grateful to be here with you today, and I'm glad I'm able to share some of the great work that is really a team effort across our entire organization. You set this up perfectly by focusing on trust. So at TELUS Health, our entire mission is built on that concept of trust between people, between employees and their employers, and between patients and their providers. So I'm going to talk about that in 2 sort of broad buckets. Internally, as a company, we've really moved away from rigid rules and embraced a culture of trust and flexibility around how and where we work. And so we have this program that we call Work Styles, and it's actually been in place since 2006. So it's been a long time. And so as a company, we've actually embraced remote work long before this was a really popular thing. But it's not just about working from home. It's about trust. Because when we embraced work styles, what we said as a company is that we trust our team members to deliver results in a way that works for them and their lives and their families and their communities. And so inclusion is a default position for us. Inclusion by having this flexible work program means that we can invite in and call in people who are caregivers, people who are parents, people with disabilities, whether those are visible or invisible. And then externally, as a technology company, as a digital health company, our accessibility and inclusivity work has two parts. So part of it is about making our products. So we're focused on making sure the products like our virtual care and our mental health platform are accessible by design, because we want to make sure that we're removing barriers, not creating new ones. And then just overall as a company, making healthcare accessible, that's part of our whole ethos. So we try to deliver health and well-being support closer to where people are, wherever they are, whenever they are, including digitally, so that we can break down three of the biggest barriers to care, which is the stigma about accessing care, the cost of care, and then geography, especially in this great nation of ours, from coast to coast to coast. We're a big country, and making healthcare accessible means bringing it closer to people. So we're providing, in a way, a digital ramp to well-being. And in terms of results, I'll finish with results. It's tangible because internally, this idea of trust and flexibility since 2006 has led to higher team engagement and retention. And like I said earlier, calling in more than the usual suspects into our high performance culture. And then externally, we at last count, I believe, we cover more than 150 million people in terms of their health needs in over 200 countries all around the world, bringing them low barrier 24/7 access to mental, physical, and financial well-being support. And so that proves that when you lead with trust, when you build trust into your organization, the returns are immediate, both internally for us as an organization, as a culture, but also for people, and also just driving our business.
Wow, that's a lot of people. um, and I mean, I think for some, moving into the digital world for healthcare is also scary, right? I mean, it can be great in terms of it's a facilitator and it can make things easier, but it's also kind of scary. It's not the way we have traditionally received our healthcare. So I would think trust is really, and building trust is important in not only the people but also the platform. So I've heard you say that the conversation around accessibility is evolving, and I completely agree with that. And it's moving beyond physical accommodations. It's and that's where we want it to go. Can you talk about a bit more about that? Share with those listening about the value of flexibility in fostering inclusion um, in realms beyond physical accommodations.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question because this is at the very heart of my work and the work of our large team. For decades, the accessibility conversations has centered around the physical world, and for really good reason. We
Mhm.
need ramps, automatic doors, accessible washrooms. These benefit everyone. I recall a recent episode where I had sustained a physical injury, and I was so glad that decades of work has gone into accessibility because it really does benefit us all. That work is still critical, and I want to emphasize that.
Mhm.
But the next frontier of accessibility is about invisible barriers that are not as obvious. And those things are about cognitive accessibility, for example, mental health and neurodiversity. And this is where flexibility, and I'm gonna put a fine point on this, becomes
Yeah.
non-negotiable. Because let's say a rigid workplace, a rigid 9 to 5 in office only culture, that actually becomes a barrier. It's an invisible barrier. It could be an invisible barrier for someone with anxiety, like an anxiety disorder or mental health issue. It could be a barrier for a parent to a child that with a disability. It could be a barrier for a neurodivergent individual who does their best work in a quiet, controlled environment. And in fact, I recently spoke to an executive at a video gaming company who said that many of her team members do their very best work in these flexible environments, and they were really struggling in a traditional rigid office hierarchical environment. And likewise, a meetings only culture where people need to speak up and show their extroversion could be a barrier for someone who's actually naturally an introvert who excels with written asynchronous communications like emails and reports and briefings as opposed to having to speak up in a room of 20 people. And
Mhm.
so this is the sort of new frontier of accessibility, where we're talking about flexibility that fosters inclusion, because it moves us from a one size fits all model where everyone has to fit in the box to a kind of meet people where they're at model. And that type of trust is the modern digital equivalent of an accessibility ramp. It gives everyone a path, a ramp to participate fully in their workplace, in their community, in the building of our country. And it's how we unlock the talents of a truly diverse global workforce. Something that we have a lot of direct experience in at TELUS Health is that we have people that come to us from all different language groups and cultures and
Mhm.
different geographies and family histories. And this is a path for them to participate fully. It's how we unlock the talents of that workforce, um, and really bring in people, call in people from every culture and every region of the world.
And I mean, I think it sounds obvious, but um, we want to unlock the talent. We want to bring that in. Companies need that in a global environment. But why is it so important for people? Can you talk to that a little bit? Why is that flexibility so important? Why does it matter that we include people from the people perspective?
Well, I mean, there's a number of reasons. I think there's reasons that directly impact people themselves. There's reasons that impact organizations, and part of my thesis is that it also impacts entire countries like ours, like Canada, especially in this environment that we're in.
Mhm.
In terms of you know people, why is calling in people important? Well, when we when we fail to take into account people's needs, we we exclude them. We heighten fear and anxiety and worry. We make it difficult for people to bring their authentic and true selves. We make it difficult for people to take risks and be innovative. And right now, in the kind of world and economy that we have, being creative and innovative is critical, absolutely critical to the success of any nation building efforts, to the success of our companies, to profitable enterprise. Even if you work in a nonprofit or in the public
Mhm.
sector, creativity and innovation are so critical right now. But if you don't call people in, if you don't include them, folks are not going to be in a position where they're able to demonstrate that creativity. So, so really, calling people in, including them, is a performance enhancing strategy, because having trust and flexibility is the prerequisite for a term that we use a lot, psychological safety. And psychological safety is probably one of the single greatest drivers of performance these days. Um, because psychological safety, when a work culture, when a community has high psychological safety, people take smart risks, not callous risks, but
Yeah.
smart strategic risks. They speak up, they challenge the status quo, they learn from mistakes quickly, because in a high psychological safety environment, people are allowed to make mistakes because we're all human. We make mistakes, but we learn from them. And because we learn from them, they're not failures. Failure is only if you fail to learn from your mistakes. If you learn from your mistakes, that's, in my books, that's still a success. That's the definition of innovation. People can be authentic. They can feel safe to ask for accommodation, share vulnerabilities, propose bold new ideas. And then, as
Mhm.
I mentioned earlier, the converse is true though too. When you lack trust, um, you get a culture of fear and compliance. People hide their mistakes, they
Right.
hide their needs, they hide their disabilities. You get sort of rigid policies and surveillance, and that's not particularly a great way to be productive. It might last. You might be able to get a temporary boost in productivity with rigid policies and surveillance, but eventually, what you're going to get is the bane of productivity, which is presenteeism. People showing up because they have to, but not because they want to, and they're not going to be giving extra, which is what we need in the environment that we're in right now.
Yeah, I think that that's true. I mean, I've certainly experienced it in work cultures where, you know, people were there, but they didn't care about their job. They didn't care about their colleagues or their team's performance, right? And so and they didn't care because they didn't feel like the organization cared about them.
100%. Like, even for when I think about myself and my career, I I care when I know that my employer cares. I care when I know my team cares. I care when I know the community and the country cares.
Mhm.
And I'm willing to give and want to give more because of that care. And conversely, when I've worked in environments, unfortunately, where I did not feel that, I was experiencing that care, I still showed up and did the work, but I can tell you honestly that I wasn't giving my all.
Yeah. Yeah. So something else that I found really compelling when you were on stage a couple of months ago was your comment that this time is a particularly critical moment for Canada. Um, we're caught, as you said, uh, and as I'm sure people are aware, in global economic crosswinds. And and overall productivity in our country has been lagging for some time. It's not something we're good at. So you made a case for doubling down on inclusivity and accessibility to create a uniquely Canadian advantage. And I've been sharing a similar message that to remain competitive in a global marketplace, we have to get accessibility right, or we're going to fall behind in innovation and productivity even further. So the fact is that in times of uncertainty, it could be all too easy for accessibility and inclusion to take a back seat to other issues. The reality is that we have, as a culture, seen accessibility as a nice to have, not a must have. And that's something that a mindset that I am driving hard to change because letting it take a back seat right now would be a serious mistake, I believe. And I think you believe the same. But can you elaborate a bit more on what's at stake and what you see the opportunity is?
This is such a critical question. And if I could be candid and blunt,
I
what's at
hope you will.
stake is literally everything. Because I'm going to just put it out there. Accessibility and inclusivity isn't just an optional, it's actually our superpower as a country. As much as energy might be, or resources, or AI, or data centers, all of which are important.
Yes.
Being an energy superpower is an important thing. We've heard that spoken about a lot. But being an accessibility and inclusivity superpower is crucial as well. And why am I saying that? Because if we try to compete on the global stage on sort of the old rules of rigid workplace, manufacturing scale, resource extraction, we're going to experience some challenges and struggle because we will build rigid, low trust, exclusionary cultures, and we're going to lose the global world, the global war for talent. That's going to put it out there, right? People have choices right now. Talented, smart, driven, passionate folks have choices when it comes to where they want to put their effort, um, who they pick as the winning team. Um, and if we compete on those old rules, we're going to lose that war. We're going to miss out on this immense untapped pool of talent, creativity, and problem solving that's sitting on the sidelines, waiting for the right, flexible, and accessible place to plant their roots and to contribute. On the other side of that, though, the opportunity, right? I've talked about what's at stake. The opportunity is absolutely immense because we can build this unique superpower to become a magnet for this talent. And even as a company, we've seen this. Canada, the fact that TELUS Health is a Canadian company is a magnet for people. It's attractive to people. It speaks to Canadian values. It speaks to Canadian inclusivity. It speaks to Canadian flexibility. And people find that attractive and want to come and work for us and contribute to those 150 million lives that we serve around the world. It's also a renewable natural resource, our diversity, um, because it's naturally occurring, it's naturally renewing, and if as we become a magnet, we will continually renew and actually build on that uh, resource.
Yeah.
Now, there's the two pieces: the trust and inclusion. Inclusion is the action because we need to take action. It has to be more than words. Trust, though, is the fuel for that action. We can only have inclusion if we start as we spoke about earlier, with trust. So while other countries may compete on cost and scale, and certainly we've had our challenges with countries that can outcompete us on cost and scale, we can and must compete on a different type of currency, on the currency of trust,
Mhm.
because we can build the world's most psychologically safe, inclusive, and accessible economy. Um, Finally, I'll say, you think about the rise of artificial intelligence. Everyone's talking about artificial intelligence and getting enough graphics chips and securing enough energy and talent. Um, but to get that talent, you need to factor in inclusive and flexible workplaces. But also, people are worried and mistrusting of AI right now. We hear a lot
Mhm.
of fears about AI. We worry about bias. Does AI create more systemic bias? Well, we can actually be a leader in building accessible by design, unbiased or bias mitigating AI systems through this psychological safety and trust and inclusivity framework that I've spoken about. And that's a huge focus for us as a company.
Yeah.
Um, so when we double down on accessibility and inclusiveness, we're not just doing the right thing. We're not just doing a nice to have. We're actually creating a high performance system, a magnet for talent, creating a more innovative and more resilient and more productive economy. And that, you know, in summary, is why I think it's our superpower.
Yeah. It's fantastic. I loved that line. I really did. That accessibility and inclusivity is our superpower. And I think it's true. And I think it has been true in some ways already. Canada has been looked at as a country that is inclusive, that is safe, that does value diversity and has been an accessibility leader in many respects for many years. We're the first or at least close to the first country with a chief accessibility officer. That's making a statement, but there's so much more to do, and certainly as we learn and as we grow, and as we help people come along with us on the journey to accessibility and inclusion, there's more to do. And I think that trust piece is so important as well, to ensure that people feel like they can bring their whole self to work and society as a whole. But we're almost at the end of our time. These discussions always go by so quickly. And I'm so glad that we've been able to have the discussion. I think you have touched on so many areas that I agree with in terms of where the future is with accessibility, and that the conversation is changing and evolving. And discussions like this, I think, help, and I think, help people to sort of think about it in a new way. Um, but as we wrap up, before I finish off, any last words or thoughts you want to leave with the audience and with people who might take time to take a look at this chat?
Well, two final thoughts. First is that it is absolutely thrilling for me and for our entire organization that I have the chance to speak with Canada's Chief Accessibility Officer today. Because right now, in the world that we live in, people are looking for a signal, a sign that somebody is out there taking leadership on these issues, that someone cares about them, cares about these issues. And the fact that we're even having this conversation is such a strong and powerful signal for that. So I'm so grateful on behalf of myself and my organization. The second thought is sort of a call to action. And I want to highlight that there's one single simple action we can take to make all of what we just talked about today real. And that is, we can make the choice to build trust. We can make the choice to build trust, because accessibility and inclusiveness isn't just a policy or a compliance department or a bunch of rules. It's actually a daily choice we make, and it starts with trust. So I challenge every listener to ask themselves one question. What's one small thing I can do today to demonstrate trust with my team or with my community or with my organization. And it might be like offering flexibility on how a project gets done because the result is more important than doing things the way they've always been done. Or it might be asking someone, what do you need to do your best work? And actually truly listening and honoring the answer to that question. It might be allowing yourself even to be vulnerable about your own needs. Because when you build trust, you create psychological safety. And when you create psychological safety, you unlock inclusion and creativity and innovation. You've unleashed that superpower that makes your team, your company, and I would say even our entire country that much more successful.
Well, thank you, Matt. Thank you for sharing your insight, your expertise, and what you and TELUS are doing. I'm really excited and buoyed to keep pushing the boundaries and work for a barrier-free Canada. And it's encouraging to learn about the work that TELUS is doing and that you're doing, that you're leading, and the difference that it is making. I know that other organizations are also taking initiative, and there are models like yours and others that will help to spur change in ways and in others where they may need a little more encouragement to get started. But on all levels, getting accessibility right requires thinking deeply about the questions that make people uncomfortable or vulnerable. But it's the only way forward. There will always be challenges, and we will evolve, and accessibility will evolve. But with challenge comes opportunity. And I think that's how we have to view accessibility, as an opportunity to get things right by factoring it in from the beginning. We are at a critical moment, both globally and nationally. We're at a hinge point. The COVID pandemic was a big point, a big shift. And with that large scale challenge, we saw how quickly change is possible when it's necessary and prioritized. And accessibility is necessary. It has to be prioritized. And as you reinforced, Matt, there is simply too much at stake not to embrace it as a way of doing business and foundational to our culture. So for all of you watching, please share this conversation widely. Keep it going. Let us know your thoughts on social media here and on our other channels. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, thank you to Dr. Matthew Chow from TELUS Health for joining me today.